priority.
Let's broaden our analysis and bring in Yezid Sayigh, who's Senior Fellow at the Malcolm H. Kerr Carnegie Mid-East Centre. Thank you, sir, for being with us. These words from Europe and from Canada collectively, will they have any impact on Israel and its military campaign against Palestinians, both in Gaza and West Bank?
Well, they'll have an impact. Whether it's a sufficient impact to halt Israeli military operations is another question. I think the answer there would be no. I think what we see and have seen since basically the hours after 7 October and the Hamas attack on southern Israel is that Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu and his political allies on the far right have essentially used violence, used armed activity in Gaza non-stop as a form of political maneuvering, both internally in order to consolidate their domestic position, but also externally to outmaneuver whether it's US allies, even countries that were supportive. And so, and this is because there are very powerful political reasons, I think, driving Netanyahu. And so, in other words, for him, a cessation of violence, a ceasefire, in other words, on whatever terms, we have seen time and time and time again over the last year and a half, is something that he fundamentally doesn't want, not simply because, or specifically because he has huge aims in Gaza of retaking the whole of it and annexing it, as the far right would like, but simply because it's his form of political escape from political challenges, running forwards by escalating militarily. And it's no accident, I think, no pure coincidence that the latest bombing raids in the last few days in Gaza were, I think, in effect, a response to Donald Trump's, the US President Trump's visit to the Middle East, which seemed to sideline Netanyahu. This is a form of a reminder. Politics is always foremost when it comes to Netanyahu's strategy, and that includes his military strategy.
It's horrific attention-seeking, if that's what it is, isn't it, Yezid, to think that Netanyahu would step up things in such a way and bomb the already destroyed areas of Gaza where people are trying to scratch some kind of a life and a living and struggling against famine, which is looming. The UN warning 14,000 babies could die over the next 48 hours if that aid isn't allowed in. 93 trucks, we understand, have made it through the roadblocks. That's nowhere near enough, is it?
Gaza received something like 500 trucks a day in order to supply its population before the war. So to speak of 93 trucks after a total blockade on all aid and assistance over the last 11 weeks clearly is more than absurd. It's despicable. But you know, again, the violence that we've seen ordered by the Netanyahu government, of course, is not just that of the last week or even of the last 18 months or so. It's the violence that was perpetrated against Gaza from the day the siege was imposed, and where the daily access of foodstuffs into Gaza was measured by Israeli authorities that calculated the daily calorific intake that they estimated the Gaza population needed. And they then, on numerous occasions, limited food supply to that specific scientific calculated amount. I mean, the sheer thought of that is chilling. But just to emphasize that various forms of violence have been acted against Gaza for a great many years.
I'm going back to that attention-seeking bombing that you were alluding to. Netanyahu sort of saying to Trump, "Look, we're here. Look, we're still doing this." Is there perhaps another take on that? Because the US has continued to fund Israel and its military program, $3.3 billion. I'm sure you'll correct me if I'm wrong. $3.3 billion every year. And I think since Trump's been in power, there's been an additional $12 billion in sales on top of that annual amount that's given. So Trump may say one thing, but if you look at those figures and what happens, perhaps he has a different agenda. Perhaps it suits Trump for Netanyahu to keep doing what he's doing. Because after all, Trump wants to develop for gain the Gaza Strip.
I hear you. I mean, for one thing, the scale of military aid to Israel shot up enormously under President Joe Biden. He's the one who approved $18 billion worth of additional assistance. I'm not sure whether Trump has made that kind of commitment since he came to office, but I mean, I think there's a lot of talk. Today, Israeli Minister Smotrich spoke of wiping out Gaza, Netanyahu spoke of total control over all of Gaza. There's a lot of that kind of rhetoric. Donald Trump spoke of turning Gaza into Riviera, buying it or taking it over, removing the Palestinians. We hear a lot of this. But I think that at least in the Israeli statements over the last 24 hours, I don't take these as at face value, not because I think someone like Smotrich or his far-right partner, Ben Gvir, wouldn't love to expel all Palestinians. But what has become really obvious in the last 17 or 18 months is that whatever they want, removing 2.25 million Palestinians from Gaza is just not something that Egypt is going to tolerate, let alone doing the same in the West Bank and East Jerusalem, which is what they would like to do in future. That would be a declaration of war with Jordan and Egypt, which would have to receive those Palestinians. That would be the end of those peace treaties. And so I think there's a lot of bluster and a lot of rhetoric that's aimed at the more radical part of Israeli society and voters that these political leaders engage in. They also use it partly to sort of ward off outside pressure to say, we're crazy and we'll go crazier still if you start to put too much pressure on us. But the fact is that for nearly a year and a half, they've shunted the Gaza population around and around and around and around, and yet they've been unable to make a breakthrough in terms either of ending the war in Gaza, and that's because I think this government does not have an actual plan for ending the war in Gaza. The Israeli government doesn't have a plan, and also because even in the most extreme scenario, it is unable to get rid of these millions of Palestinians by simply shunting them across the border. And so there's a lot of sort of smoke and mirrors here where the far right is agitating, increasing the pressure for annexation, for total takeover, knowing, I think, that privately at least, and Netanyahu, I think, knows this very well, that they can't actually do any of this because if they could have done, they would have done. So the net result is violence stands in for meaningful political thinking and discussion on the part of this Israeli government. And the Israeli army, therefore, comes up with day-to-day tactics or month-to-month tactics, which are mostly about the massive use of firepower to stand in for this missing political strategy.
Yezid Sayigh, thank you very much indeed for your analysis here. Yezid Sayigh, Senior Fellow of the Malcolm H. Kerr Carnegie Mid-East Centre. Yezid, thank you very much for being with us here on France 24.